Picture this. You've spent your life in a gray Scottish town. Work is scarce. Your savings are small. Your children thin. Then a decorated war hero strides into the hall in a dazzling uniform, medals flashing under the lamps. He tells you about a country you've never heard of. Poyais, a tropical kingdom on the Caribbean coast where rivers hold globules of pure gold, and the soil is so rich you can throw seeds on the ground and harvest 3 times a year. A place under British protection with a parliament, an opera house, and a capital city called St. Joseph laid out like a Georgian dream. He's not just any salesman. He's His Serene Highness, Gregor MacGregor of Poyais, a Scottish lord in all but name, a general who fought alongside Simon Bolivar. A man from a clan whose motto is, "Royal is my race." He shows you engraved banknotes from the Bank of Poyais. He holds up bonds listed in London papers beside Colombia and Chile. There's a thick guidebook by a British officer, detailed maps with harbors and streets, a coat of arms with 2 proud unicorns like Scotland's own. You can buy land for a few shillings an acre. Passage is arranged. Women and children sail free. You sell your furniture. You quit your job. You board a ship bound for paradise. Months later, you stand on a steaming, mosquito-choked shore. No port, no houses, no capital city. Just jungle, swamp, and silence. Poyais does not exist. By the time anyone understands that, bodies are already piling up in the sand. And the man who sold this dream? He will die a wealthy hero with a military funeral in a country that still thanks him for his service. Why should you care about a fake country invented 200 years ago? Because the people who died for Poyais weren't fools. They were cautious, hardworking families. They checked newspapers, read prospectuses, saw official stamps and legal documents, and watched Poyais bonds trade beside those of real nations. They did what ordinary people still do when something looks official. Poyais wasn't a back alley deal. Its bonds traded on the London Stock Exchange, underwritten by a former Lord Mayor. Its banknotes were watermarked and numbered. Its constitution was printed and bound. The Poyaisian legation had respectable offices in London, Edinburgh, and Glasgow. 250 settlers sailed. Roughly 180 never came home. A 72% mortality rate. Children, tradesmen, widows, people who just wanted a second chance. Yet when survivors returned to Britain, many defended the man who doomed them. They insisted the expedition must have landed in the wrong place. They blamed the climate, the timing, the agents, anyone but Gregor MacGregor. Admitting he was a fraud meant admitting they had built their future on smoke. We like to think more information and better maps protect us from scams. But Poyais shows that facts alone aren't enough when hope is weaponized. The emotional levers that sold a jungle as Utopia in 1822 are selling tokens, coins, and yield farms today. Scarcity, community, national pride, the promise of escape and reinvention. So when we talk about Gregor MacGregor, the man who sold a country that didn't exist, we aren't visiting a dusty curiosity. We're looking at the operating manual for modern fraud. To understand how a man could sell a fake nation, you have to start with the man. Gregor MacGregor was born in Scotland in 1786, into a clan with a wounded history and royal fantasies. For generations, the MacGregors had been outlawed, their name illegal, their motto defiantly proclaiming, "Royal is my race." For Gregor, that wasn't just heritage, it was a script. As a young British officer, he loved the trappings of rank. He obsessed over uniforms and medals, drilling his men on appearance more than tactics. He craved ceremony and status, not just command. He married into money, then lost it when his wife died. Overnight, the peacock soldier with expensive taste had no income and no stage. So he went where ambitious, restless soldiers went in the early 1800s, Latin America. Amid the wars of independence, he reinvented himself. He became a general in the Venezuelan forces, married a cousin of Simon Bolivar, and fought in campaigns where chaos blurred the line between courage and incompetence. He led a desperate fighting retreat, the Retreat of the 600, that genuinely impressed comrades. He also abandoned men under fire, including at Portobello, where he reportedly fled by sea while his troops were butchered. But news traveled slowly. By the time full reports reached Europe, MacGregor was already telling his own version in London salons. He came home not as a disgraced mercenary, but as a dashing hero of independence wars. Newspapers repeated his stories. Hosts seated him at the head of the table. He had what every con artist needs, a believable legend anchored in just enough truth. Then on the Mosquito coast of Central America, he found the raw material for his masterpiece. In 1820, MacGregor secured a murky land grant from the local Mosquito king. In exchange for gifts and rum, the king signed over millions of acres of sparsely inhabited coastal jungle. To the king, it was likely another trading concession. To MacGregor, it was something far grander. He saw a blank map and a chance to draw a kingdom. By the time he reached London again in 1821, he called himself His Serene Highness Gregor I, Cazique of Poyais. He took that little-known stretch of coast, gave it a new name, and inflated a vague grant into a royal charter. He registered the documents with Britain's Court of Chancery, wrapping his fantasy in legal respectability. Then he started to build Poyais, not with bricks or roads, but with paper. He commissioned maps showing a capital city, Saint-Ouen, Joseph, on a broad river, complete with cathedral, parliament, and grand squares. Where the coast was swamp, he drew deep, sheltered harbors. He hired engravers to print thousands of Poyaisian banknotes with watermarks and serial numbers. They looked as solid as any colonial currency. He unveiled a national flag and a coat of arms with 2 unicorns, echoing Scotland's royal imagery. To British eyes, it felt both exotic and reassuring. Next came the book. Sketch of the Mosquito Shore, including the territory of Poyais, supposedly by Thomas Strangeways, a British officer. In reality, it was a patchwork of plagiarized travel writing in pure invention, carefully rewritten to insert Poyais everywhere. To a potential settler in 1822, it felt unimpeachably official. The book described a mild, healthy climate, fertile soil requiring little labor, rivers with visible gold, a friendly native population already living in harmony with industrious British colonists. It gave pages of topographical detail and practical advice: what to plant, how the government worked. Doubt was drowned in specifics. While the book circulated, MacGregor staged the physical theater of a state, Poyaisian legations in London and Scotland, clerks issuing land grants, titles, and government appointments, wax seals, stamps, uniforms. He created the Order of the Green Cross, a chivalric order for sale. He appointed officers to phantom regiments, judges to empty courts, even a shoemaker to the Princess of Poyais. Absurd on paper, convincing in a candlelit office with the right parchment. And all of it landed in a very particular economic moment. Post-Napoleonic Britain was awash with capital and starved for returns. Latin American republics were issuing high-yield bonds in London. Exotic mines and new republics were the talk of every coffee house. So when MacGregor floated a $200,000 Poyais bond in 1822, offering a 6% coupon like Colombia and Chile, it didn't sound insane. It sounded like the game everyone was already playing. Respected bankers underwrote it. Newspapers listed it alongside real sovereign debt. If the City of London believed, why shouldn't a butcher from Glasgow or a clerk in Edinburgh? MacGregor raised a fortune. He moved into an estate, attended the Lord Mayor's banquet as a foreign dignitary, and toasted his own imaginary kingdom. But to make the illusion bulletproof, Poyais needed one more thing: citizens. The first ship, the Honduras packet, left London in September 1822. Around 70 settlers on board, clutching guidebooks and land certificates, pockets stuffed with crisp Poyaisian banknotes. They had sold almost everything they owned. They imagined a bustling port greeting them. Warehouses, docks, perhaps a band. At the very least, government officials with wagons and supplies. Instead, when the Honduras packet reached the coordinates, the passengers pressed against the rails and saw nothing. No harbor, no town, just tangled green jungle, a swampy river mouth, and curtains of insects. No other British flag in sight. There was a stunned, heavy silence. The captain checked his charts. The settlers argued. Maybe they'd anchored in the wrong bay. Maybe St. Joseph was just upriver. But there were no buildings, no cleared land, no sign of any prior settlement. They went ashore anyway. What else could they do? They built rough shelters from branches and canvas, still believing that officials from the real Poyais would appear. After all, there was a book, a map, banknotes, a prince. This couldn't all be fiction. Months later, a second larger ship arrived from Scotland, the Kennersley Castle. About 180 more souls, led by a man proudly appointed as Poyais lieutenant governor. He too had been conned. He expected to step into his government house, raise the flag, and assume office. He stepped into a nightmare. By then, disease was already stalking the camp. The rainy season turned the ground into a fetid soup. Mosquitoes carried malaria and yellow fever. Drinking water ran foul. The healthy climate of the guidebook was lethal. Settlers tried to plant the seeds they'd brought. One wrote that the sun burnt them like snuff, or they rotted in the streaming humidity. Food ran low. Hope thinned. One man, the Edinburgh Shoemaker, who had proudly bought the title Shoemaker to the Princess of Poyais, grasped the horror with special clarity. He looked around at the mud, the bare feet, the rotting hammocks, and the invisible princess. He understood the joke, and that he was the punchline. He shot himself in his hammock. Others died more slowly. Fever, dysentery, despair. Some simply lay in their hammocks and stopped rising. Even as graves multiplied, many settlers clung to the idea that Poyais was real, just misplaced. That they, not the prince, had somehow erred. A whole reality built in Britain felt too solid to dissolve on one desolate beach. It took an outsider to break the spell. In May 1823, a ship from British Honduras noticed distress signals. The magistrate from Belize, Marshal Bennett, rowed ashore. He listened. He looked around. Then he told them the truth. There was no Poyaisian government, no capital city. The local king had never heard of a cazique Gregor. The nation they'd invested in existed only on London paper. The settlers were stunned. Some refused to believe him. Others just wept. Bennett organized evacuations. Survivors were taken to Belize, many too sick to move. The jungle they'd been promised as a garden had become an open-air cemetery. Of about 250 who'd sailed, around 180 were dead by the time the story reached the British press that autumn. Meanwhile, Gregor MacGregor was already in Paris, planning the French version. Now it gets stranger. Confronted with the disaster, graves, widows, orphaned children, you might expect investors and settlers to turn on MacGregor as a monster. Many didn't. In London, some victims insisted in court that he must have been misled by his agents. Others argued the grant was real, the climate unfortunate, the execution flawed. One survivor even wrote a book largely exonerating him. Admitting that the cazique was a fraud meant admitting they had uprooted their lives, risked their families, and sailed across an ocean for nothing. It was easier to keep believing in Poyais the idea. Long after Poyais, the place had been exposed as fiction. MacGregor knew how to surf that denial. In Paris, he repackaged the dream for a new market. French investors, French settlers. New bonds, new promises. Only when officials noticed passport applications for a country their maps didn't show did alarm bells ring. He was arrested, tried, and, astonishingly, acquitted. His defense was simple. The land grant was real, he said. His intentions were noble. He blamed incompetent subordinates and bad luck. He painted himself as a visionary nation builder undermined by others. The court, tangled in paperwork and diplomatic sensitivities, let him go. Some of his associates were convicted. The sovereign prince walked free. He even returned to London for a time, trying to run smaller Poyais schemes into the 1830s. Eventually, when Europe grew too hot, he sailed back to Venezuela. There, the legend he'd carefully nurtured decades earlier paid off one last time. The Venezuelan government restored his rank as general, granted him a pension, and honored him as an independence hero. The disasters of Poyais were half a world away. The story they remembered was the fighting retreat and the Bolivar connection. When he died in 1845, he received a full military funeral. Ministers followed his coffin. The man whose lies had killed nearly 200 British settlers was in the end buried as a patriot. So what does the story of Poyais mean for us now? Look at the structure of MacGregor's fraud. He didn't just forge signatures or fake a ledger. He built an alternate reality. A guidebook posing as expert testimony, maps as proof of existence, banknotes and bonds as tangible evidence of an economy, titles and honors as social glue. Every piece reinforced every other piece. Doubt in one area was smothered by apparent confirmation from another. Modern scams work the same way. Today's fake projects have slick websites, detailed roadmaps, impressive-looking teams, and active communities. They're listed on exchanges next to legitimate assets. Influencers talk them up. Regulators, like the city bankers of 1822, sometimes lag behind. They promise outsized yields when safe returns feel pitiful. They dangle the dream of early retirement, escape from wage labor, a place in some digital frontier. They also target identity. MacGregor leaned on Scottish pride and hardship, offering a New Caledonia where his clan would redeem a national failure. Modern fraudsters target diasporas, online subcultures, or political tribes in much the same way. When these schemes collapse, communities often rally around the founder. They blame regulators, haters, bad timing, anything but the possibility that the charismatic leader sold them a fantasy. Admitting that feels like admitting you were naive. That instinct kept settlers waiting on that beach, staring at empty jungle, convinced the real Poyais must be just around the bend. Gregor MacGregor's masterpiece was not just inventing a country. It was persuading intelligent, decent people to defend that country long after it had killed them. Poyais is a story about greed, yes, but even more about hope and identity. It shows how a confident man in a good suit, with the right symbols and the right timing, can make the impossible feel inevitable. The next time you see a glossy pitch for a project promising effortless returns, backed by convincing documents in a passionate community, remember the settlers on that empty shore. Ask yourself one question. Are you buying land in a real place? Or a ticket to Poyais?